Hey YouTube, time for a mad scientist video because some days I sort of feel provoked to make a mad scientist video, and today's the day. Those of you who've been following my channel for a while will be aware that I get what electricity I need via a fairly modest solar array, trackable daily, as well as seasonally. To extract maximum performance from the panels. The direct current electricity then comes down the wires, and the wires enter the pyramid in which I store my electricity, and it then comes out through an inverter. This particular inverter was built from pieces in the TV repair shop in Glen Innes in either late 1985 or early 1986. It cost me $300. I ordered it from a catalogue, expecting it to arrive as an inverter. It arrived as a bag full of bits with instructions. And I was a nurse, not a sparky. So happily, because I'd been so enthusiastic to get this brand new solid state electronic inverter to replace the 50-watt points operated inverter that I'd inherited from my father and destroyed in about 3 weeks by using it to run a stereo that could suck 100 watts. I'd actually paid in advance. I paid the $300 for a receipt, and then when I went to collect the inverter and a bag of bits showed up, the moral responsibility for providing me with an inverter that looked like the picture in the catalogue lay with Athol Thomas, friend of my father's who owned the shop. So his tradesman, Vince Davies, he got to build that inverter from bits in 1985 or 1986. Now, it only did a couple of years when I was living out the other side of Emerville. Once it died when I fed it a drink while it was operating, and Vince had to replace its drive transistors. Then it sat in the cupboard for a while, long while, and in 2000 it came out of the cupboard, hello, and it went into the pyramid, being fed by a single battery, being fed by a single 30-watt panel with a backup generator, and the whole thing even glowed in the dark. And one of the features that I'd never really questioned with this inverter is that it has the ability to sit there being connected to a power cord, with the power cord going wherever, and the power cord being attached to something like a light. And if the light is switched on and if there's no current being drawn, then the inverter goes silent and it doesn't pull anything at all out of your batteries. Yet over here in the hut, if I switch on this light, which has no mechanical circuit connection, nothing happens. However, if I switch on this light, which has an incandescent bulb, and therefore it has a mechanical circuit all the way through the inverter to the batteries, as soon as I switch it on, there you go. And then you can run on that, which is drawing 1.3 amps. And if I shut it down with the power switch here, it'll just die out and stop, and it'll stay stopped even if I switch the inverter back on. And once again, it takes a mechanical current drain to start the inverter. But this time, let's do it the other way around. We'll switch this one off. We'll switch this one on, which is sucking 2.1 amps. Older technology, uses more power. And then switch it off. And then carefully watching. There you go. Another feature of this 31-year-old inverter is that it has the fins on the heat exchangers for its 4 output transistors. It has these fins arranged vertically. So the transistor gets hot, heats the metal gets hot, heats the air gets hot, hot air rises, and thermosiphon effect pumps away the waste heat from the busiest part of the inverter, which I think is pretty clever. So anyway, 30 years ago, when I gave this thing a drink while playing the stereo with the door of the Power-Hutch open while entertaining a sweet young thing, I took it back to the bloke who built it and convinced Davey put 4 new power output transistors on it, and I thought nothing of it because, you know, that's what you do, you fix things. 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday afternoon, the inverter kept switching itself off 3 times in a row and it wouldn't charge the mobile phone, and I thought, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Maybe my bad manners in leaving it connected to really old batteries that I didn't refill with water for 4 years in a row and fed the inverter low input voltages for a while, and then I filled the batteries up and everything was great for a while, but now it's been acting as if the batteries are in the final stages of collapse. Maybe the inverter has died. Don't know why I thought the inverter has died. So without further ado, I took it out of the pyramid, I took it to the town, I left it with my son while I went away and took money out of the bank and bought myself a modern solid state inverter. And this one was price tagged at $89 versus $300 32 years ago. And I figured I'd have to run on this while I waited for my son to fix whatever was wrong with Old Faithful. But my son was only able to determine that it really needed a new set of terminal clamps because the other ones had been corroded by the hydrogen sulfide mixing with condensation in the atmosphere, causing sulfuric acid, which corrodes lots of things if you leave them in close proximity to batteries that are breathing in and out. But he said there wasn't anything wrong with the inverter. Therefore, I came back home and I took my multimeter and I pronged the battery bank's output leads at sundown in the dark. And that's when I discovered that the reason the 12 to 240 volt inverter wasn't functioning was because it was only getting fed with 6 volts. Because these 2 pairs of 6 volt deep cycle 225 amp hour batteries ganged together at 12 volts, wired up to increase the amp hours of storage, they were just about dry and they were not producing very much. But they'd been in the pyramid for 5 years. This one, which had been in there since 2009, it was pretty flat. This pair, which had only been in there since 2010, one of them had completely collapsed and it was only putting out 6 volts. That was basically sucking all of the power out of the rest of the battery bank combined. So clearly what I needed to do was to get the multimeter onto my 3 spare sets of 6 volt batteries that have come off a golf cart and figure out which was the best pair and bring those over here to the pyramid and set them up on the rocky ground in front of the pyramid within reach of the leads in a place where all the cords would reach. And I could shut the door. So I did all that, and then on my hands and knees in the dark, working by torchlight, Muggins here somehow cross-connected the 32-year-old Old Faithful inverter. Therefore, had to go and buy this one for a problem that didn't exist, and when I came home with this as the spare, I created the problem. Literally. I went to town and bought a spare inverter while expecting my son to fix the old inverter. Turned out there was nothing wrong with the old inverter, but the spare that I brought home, just in case, went straight into service that very night. And it came with a spare fuse, and it came with a cigarette lighter adapter. So I guess it can become part of the equipment of the car. But whereas I showed you the old one cools itself with a barometric thermosiphon driven effect, made possible because of the orientation of the cooling fins on the heat sinks and the fact that the designer actually thought a bit in advance. This new high-tech shrunken little doohickey, it has got cooling fins built onto its case, but they all run horizontally. So none of them generate any kind of an appreciable thermosiphon effect. It just sits there and it traps heat under its own fins. Therefore, it has air inlets at that end, and it has a little DC electric cooling fan. And it either blows or it sucks, but the point is, it makes air go through the mechanism. So the cooling fins on the outside are largely decorative. And so, when we turn this one on, there we go as the light comes on. And 1.9 amps. Edging up to 2 amps as the filament warms up. Its resistance increases. So, 2 amps. Sun's been on the display, so it's a bit hard to read. Shortly it'll tell us what the current battery voltage is. Absorbed charge, so the charge controller is throwing away excess power. 14.3 volts at 2 amps. So 28.6 watts of power coming out of the battery, going into the little new inverter to make a 20-watt light glow incandescently. Okay, so now we've turned all the power off at the hut, and there's still 0.4 of an amp going into this little thing, unless you turn it off. 0.4 times 14.3 equals 5.72 watts drain times 24 equals 137.28 watt hours per day. Last 24-hour cycle I only used 187.93 watt hours in a day, measured and recorded, to run my hut, even with the light over the sink. So leaving that inverter on 24 hours a day would use 73% as much energy as I actually use on lights and radio and phone chargers in a 24-hour period. So the reason I paid $98 to get Vince Davey to fix me 32-year-old inverter is because from this condition, this old thing can do this, as well as
new memory,
that.
working memory.
But such is life, that 30 years of progress has resulted in something that's, well, half the size, third of the size, third of the price, and not really that useful or practical, unless you really enjoy running backwards and forwards across the clearing to turn the new thing on. And with the same light running, the old inverter uses no more power than the new one does. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. What progress. Ciao.